Who really was Ramses II? Welcome to Calapax, where history comes to life and every video immerses you in the fate of those who have shaped the world. Today, get ready to step through the gates of time and walk in the footsteps of a leader who became a legend, Ramses II, the Pharaoh of pharaohs. From the banks of the Nile to the colossal temples of Abu Simbel, his name still echoes in stone and in human memory. Master of war, visionary builder, living divine figure, he ruled Egypt with a firm hand for more than 6 decades. His destiny was inscribed in monumental letters between battles, alliances, and a summand and obsession. Defy eternity. For more than 3,000 years, his aura fascinates. But who was Ramses the Great? Really, a god on earth, or a man of flesh and power? Before setting out on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to not miss anything. Thank you and bon voyage. Around 1300 before Christ, the world was undergoing major transformations. Civilizations firmly established competed to extend their influence and consolidate their territories. In the Mediterranean, basin, Eastern Asia, and beyond, powerful kingdoms strove to control trade routes and associated riches. Egypt, under the 19th dynasty in the City of the Fenced, held a central position. While workers constructed the capital Pi-Ramesses in the Nile Delta, the Hittite Empire, led by Mu'tatali the Sang, surveyed the Levant, and further east, Babylonia and Assyria confronted each other. The Canaanite Levant, composed of city-states like Ugarit and Byblos, became a field of competition. Across the Aegean Sea, might seem to distinguish itself as a great Gale power. Further away, the Shang dynasty dominated China, and the Harappan civilization continued its development. In the Andes and Mesoamerica, pre-Chavin and pre-Old Mac cultures already heralded organized societies. This panorama testifies to a world in effrains, where innovations and territorial ambitions shaped a cosmopolitan era. In the northeast of Africa, Egypt lived under the 19th dynasty, begun by Ramses III the Third and continued by Seti I. He had to establish himself after the Amarna period, marked by the religious reforms of China. Seti I relied on a disciplined army and large-scale architectural projects to strengthen the state. He accelerated the construction of Pi-Ramesses, which would become the administrative and military capital. Its location in the north favored proximity to the Mediterranean, access to the trade routes of the Levant, and control of threatened eastern borders. Workers supervised by scribes and engineers built temples and military complexes. The engraved bas-reliefs testified to Seti I's desire to inscribe his reign in posterity. The 19th dynasty reconnects with the grandeur of the throne of Upper and Lower Egypt. Meanwhile, the local population learned the necessary techniques for this monumental project that paved the way for the rise of Ramses II. In the northeast of the Mediterranean, on the Anatolian plateau, the Hittite Empire, led by Mu'tatali II, reached a decisive turning point in its history. Were now in for their mastery of war chariots and solid administration. The Hittites sought to strengthen their presence in northern Syria. The Levant, a strategic point between Egypt and Anatolia, concentrated caravan and maritime routes. Confrontation with Egypt became inevitable. Seti I engaged in campaigns to secure his castle kingdoms, now crossed paths with Mu'tatali II, determined to assert his position. At Hittites, the Hittite capital troops were raised, officers trained, and military arts perfected, notably archery and cavalry. Fortresses were reinforced, and alliances concluded with local sovereigns opposed to Egypt. The two powers thus prepared for a decisive confrontation in Syria and on trade routes to Mesopotamia. Although the Battle of Kadesh had not yet occurred, the groundwork for an emblematic conflict was already laid. In the fertile valley of the Tigris and Euphrates, the geopolitical landscape is lively. The Kassite dynasty, heirs of the Amorites, adopts the techniques and culture of the region while preserving traits of its mountainous origin. It administers Babylon and its hinterland thanks to a haired bureaucracy, a permanent army, and fluctuating alliances. Further north, Assyria, under Adad-Nirari I, takes advantage of this weakening of its neighbors to extend its influence. Reinforced East, a disciplined army and a flourishing craft industry, notably in the manufacture of bronze weapons. While Egypt poses a threat to the west, Hittite ambitions worry the Mesopotamian kingdoms. They fear that Anatolia will control leavened trade. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, routes of transportation and fertility, make Babylon and Usur major commercial crossroads. As 1300 approaches, the regional balance remains fragile and a tip in favor of the most enterprising kingdom. Between the Mediterranean and the deserts, the Levant is a mosaic of independent city-states. Each is ruled by a king or a council, seeking to preserve its autonomy against the great powers. The ports of Ugarit, Byblos, Tyre and Sidon are commercial hubs. They host Egyptian, Hittite and Mesopotamian goods and embassies. Ugarit develops a simplified Q&A form alphabet, while Byblos is distinguished by its cedar wood prized for shipbuilding. The great powers seek to win the loyalty of local elites with gifts, privileges, or vassalage treaties, while Canaanite rulers negotiate military protection while preserving their freedom. Tensions between rival cities complicate the situation. Some prefer the Hittite Tyre, others Egypt. The region across roads of trade routes is crossed by caravans carrying spices and metals, while ships transport oil and wine. This blending nurtures a prosperous urban culture whose remains testified to the artistic and religious richness. In the Peloponnese, the Mycenaean civilization flourishes around powerful citadels, like Mycenaean Tyrons and Pylos. These fortresses, built on strategic heights, are famous for their cyclopean walls and complex palaces. Inside, artists and craftsmen produce goldsmithing, refined ceramics and bronze, weapons, fueling dynamic trade in the Aegean basin. Mastering bronze through Anatolian tin, the Mycenaean and Zenghians necking across the Mediterranean to trade olive oil, perfumes and other products for metals, spices and amber. Although the Trojan War is legendary, real tensions with the Anatolians are confirmed by incidental discoveries. Around 1030, Byzantine influence extends throughout the Aegean Sea, with coastal outposts and maritime alliances coming into confrontation with the kingdoms of the Near East. At the other end of the Eurasian continent, around 1600, Chang China is distinguished by its artistic and religious achievements. By 1300, the Chang dominate part of the Yellow River Valley, and their capital, at Wayne, becomes a major cultural center. Ritual bronzes, like the Deng and Gaze, testify to their metallurgical mastery and the symbolic power of society. These objects are used during royal ceremonies and reveal the importance of ancestor erasek. Divination through inscriptions on tortoise shells or ox scapulae allows anticipation of harvests, weather, or political decisions. The Chang establish warlike and commercial relations with their neighbors, sometimes imposing tribute or offering military protection. Although this period is distant from the Near East, it remains a major cultural pole with its own writing and a distinctive art of war, laying the foundations for lasting imperial tradition. At the southeast extremity of the Asian continent, the Harappan civilization, once flourishing in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, is in decline. Around 1300, although these cities have lost their luster, signs of adaptation persist, probably due to climatic changes or modification of river networks. In the Ganges plain, new cultures are emerging, laying the foundations for future kingdoms, better known thanks to Vedic texts and archaeology. Trade with Iran and Afghanistan circulates metals, ivory and other exotic products, with influences from Mesopotamia and Iran in pottery and statuary. India, at this time, remains segmented, and the transition to the Vedic era happens slowly, marked by a political and cultural reorganization. Exchanges will continue to nourish the future religious and Antal developments founded on the urbanism and writing of the Indus civilization. On the other side of the Atlantic, the American civilizations of 1300 are still in an early phase, far from the future peaks of the great pre-Columbian empires. In the Andes, pre-shaving cultures strengthen their agriculture around maize, potatoes, and quinoa. The communities practice fishing on the coast, herding alpacas and llamas in the highlands. The emergence of ceremonial centers heralds the rise of the Chevan civilization. Further north in Mesoamerica, the Olmecs, considered the mother culture, developed innovative agricultural techniques and monumental art. These regions, remote from the Old World, follow independent cultural trajectories, but share fundamental issues: sedentarization, agricultural development, religious structuring, and demographic growth. In 1300, a vast network of exchanges connects different regions: the Nile, the Mediterranean, the Euphrates, the Aegean Sea, and the Persian Gulf are essential trade corridors.
Nubian gold, exchanged with the Levant, is found in jewelry, while Afghan lapis, lazuli, is prized for its ornamental use in Mesopotamia. Tin, necessary for making mornans, comes from the Anatolian mountains or the
Iranian plateau and is transported to Egypt, Mycenae and Mesopotamia. Baltic amber travels down to the Aegean regions, transported by caravanners and sailors. Although this globalization is not as unified as the Silk Road, it fosters influences in art, culture, and religion. The royal courts of Pi-Ramesses, Hattusa, Babylon, and Mycenae covet these exotic products, fueling constant demand. In this complex context, Ramesses II, one of the most notable pharaohs in history, will begin his reign after the death of his father, Seti-Refersh. He stands out for his project to secure Egypt's borders against the Hittite Empire and preserve the conquests of his predecessors. After several victories, he signs the first peace treaty with the Hittites, a model of international diplomacy. In the following decades, he leads campaigns, monumental constructions, and forges alliances. His rise reflects the geopolitical dynamics of the 13th and 14th centuries, where each kingdom exploits its opportunities. Ramesses II leaves a lasting imprint in Egypt and beyond through his colossi, temples, and inscriptions, embodying the fusion of military power, expansion, diplomacy, and a cult of posterity. In 1303 before Christi, in the Nile Delta region, Ramesses II was born. According to Egyptian sources, he was born in Avaris, the former Hyksos capital, in the heart of the Pi-Ramesses construction site, the future political and military center of the 19th dynasty. His mother, Queen Tuya, belonged to the military lineage of the Ramessides, influential in the state. At this time, Egypt was emerging from the turmoil of Akhenaten's reform, seeking to restore its ancient traditions and marked by his father's ambitions and a rich dynastic heritage. The father of Ramesses, Seti-Defied, ascended the throne after the passing of Hormoniv, the last ruler of the 18th dynasty, thus founding the 19th dynasty. His main challenge was to restore order after Akhenaten's upheavals and to revive a weakened monarchy. He revived traditional worship, honoring gods like Amun, Ra, and Ptah, and restored the temples and priests, neglected by Aten. Militarily, he led victorious expeditions in Nubia and the Levant, consolidating Egyptian authority and strengthening the economy. Seti III worked to restore Egypt to the apex of the international scene and prepared his son to govern, passing on the necessary knowledge for his legacy. In his early years, Ramesses VI a careful education, learning hieroglyphic writing, literature, and rhetoric. He also learned resource management through Nilamita readings and accounts, essential skills for an administrator and commander. The schools of scribes, supervised by experienced scholars, taught him various knowledge to govern a complex empire. At the same time, he received a complete military training: archery, light chariot driving, infantry discipline, and field tactics. He sometimes accompanied his father in the garrisons, discovering the camp life and strategic stakes. Cultivated and robust, he embodied the alliance between priestly tradition and military power, pillars of the Egyptian monarchy. Queen Tui's contribution to Ramesses' education was essential. Coming from a military lineage, she maintained influential relations within the command circles, which offered Ramesses particular credit among officers in remote provinces. Diplomacy was crucial. Royal princesses sealed alliances through marriage with allied rulers, promoting peace and trade exchanges. Although too young to participate actively, Ramesses observed his father's negotiations and learned to handle persuasion. Tui's devotion was also evident in religious ceremonies, where she offered gifts, recited prayers, and sought oracles to affirm the legitimacy of the royal lineage. Beyond the religious aspect, Seti-Threon's policy aimed to consolidate the empire, notably through the management of recently conquered territories. In the Levant, cities like Byblos and Tyre facilitated the supply of wood, metal, and luxury goods, while in Nubia, controlling gold mines and stone quarries required rigorous administration supported by strong garrisons. Seti-Thoi entrusted his best officers to oversee these strategic regions to protect the empire. Informed of reports on these provinces, Ramesses refined his understanding the kingdom, anticipating his future responsibilities and already perceiving the challenges of maintaining a wealthy yet vulnerable kingdom against foreign powers. At 14, Seti-Thoi formalized the succession, proclaiming Ramesses crown prince, a decisive milestone documented on steles and in temple records. Ramesses, now the chosen heir, was already participating in offering rituals, inspecting troops, and taking part in important decisions, erecting statues or restoring sanctuaries. Artists sculpted his likeness in stone, enhancing his growing stature. This emphasis also consolidated Seti-Thoi's authority, ensuring the stability and prosperity of the Ramesside dynasty. Reliefs at Karnak and Luxor attest to Ramesses' role as a potential co-regent, indicating his privileged position in Egyptian power. Among the signs of Ramesses' rapid rise was the consecration of a colossal statue in his likeness in the Great Temple of Karnak. This was an initiative usually reserved for pharaohs, indicating Seti-Thoi's confidence in his son. The people, priests and scribes, admired this monument, depicting the adolescent, draped in the royal apron, and crowned with the names in a dignified posture. The hieroglyphs at the base proclaimed his rank as heir and his sacred connection with the gods, reinforcing his authority and familiarizing him with the Apova moon, a major deity. This gesture laid the foundations for his personal devotion, essential for solidifying the link between the dynasty and the state religion. In parallel to the demonstrations of prestige, the court was filled with surprising anecdotes such as that of the domesticated lion given to Ramesses. This beast sent to the court by a vassal people seeking the favor of Seti-Thoi became the usual companion of the young prince during his military parades. Lions, symbols of strength and courage, were feared creatures. Keeping them close was a display of invincible power. This story, conveyed by inscriptions and court songs, forged the myth of an unshakable sovereign, blessed by the gods. For the population, the image of a prince mastering a formidable creature reinforced the image of the Egyptian monarchy as powerful and reassuring. The birth of Ramesses II, combined with the legacy of Seti-Thoi, traced the contours of an exceptional destiny. After the Amarna period, Egypt sought to regain its religious and political stability embodied by Seti III, who through the restoration of traditional cults, successful military campaigns, and a rigorous management of the provinces, restored the kingdom. Ramesses trained in the handling of weapons, the management of civil affairs, and subtle diplomacy, distinguished himself as an heir. His status was confirmed when he was proclaimed crown prince and associated with the great architectural works of the reign. Humanity was soon to discover in one of the most prominent figures of antiquity. When contemplating the early days of Ramesses II, it is difficult to imagine that a young boy, barely out of childhood, assumed such responsibilities. From his earliest years, he was immersed in an environment combining mitineer, education, administrative rigor, and royal arts, essential elements to his personality and rapid ascent. To understand this period, one must place themselves in a pre-1300 Egypt, marked by the turmoil of the Amarna period, but eager to restore an imperial tradition they initiated by his father Seti III. At a time when a sovereign's prestige depended as much on his Sicily victories as on his ability to organize and enrich the country, the royal family trained the heir with particular care. Thus, Ramesses was educated in intellectual disciplines and the understanding of the Nile, the nourishing river of the kingdom. Ramesses' martial training starts early, as tradition demands that the heir master the bow perfectly. From a very young age, he trains to develop strength and precision. The bow, the main weapon of Egyptian regiments, allows for attacking from a distance, whether from a wall or a moving chariot. Seti III shows elite officers to teach Ramesses not only to aim, but also to breathe correctly, calculate the court knows that this young heir will one day become the guarantor of Egypt's military power. In parallel to the art of archery, Ramesses learns to drive the light chariot, a symbol Egyptian superiority on the battlefield. These chariots, built of wood and reinforced with metal, are designed for maximum speed and maneuverability. Harnessed to two nervous but robust horses, they provide the pharaonic army with physis mobility. Ramesses must coordinate his movements with the chariot here, while being able to draw his bow or javelin during the ride. The exercise requires perfect balance, as the slightest false move can endanger the entire heir. The horses, for their part, are trained to remain docile even under the noise of battle. The goal is, for the future sovereign, to master these chariots, first alone, then at the head of a detachment, to decide the outcome of battles. Ramesses' education is not solely martial. Seti wants his son to possess the knowledge necessary to manage a great empire. Ramesses therefore learns to read and write hieroglyphs, a complex system reserved for scribes, and an educated elite. At the court, priests and learned officials help him master this sacred present on the walls of temples, tombs, and palaces. The prince spends hours deciphering religious texts, historical chronicles, and administrative records. This immersion teaches him the notion of dynastic continuity very early on. A pharaoh leaves traces in stone and in the collective memory through official inscriptions. To his education are added lessons in applied mathematics, one of the main tools of which is the nilometer installed, or the river to measure the height of the annual floods, crucial for Egyptian agriculture. 2 weeks they lead to famine. Too strong, they cause devastating floods. These readings directly influence taxes, the storage of cereals, and the allocation of land. Ramesses learns to interpret these data, calculate water volumes, and manage distribution. Although this knowledge usually belongs to the scribes, I want his son to understand this river economy. This knowledge allows him to grasp the importance of a solid administrative base and of controlling the agricultural calendar to establish peace and successfully carry out great works. Armed with his skills, Ramesses does not remain in the shadows. His name is already circulating among the officers who see him as a leader, attentive to advice and determined to take initiatives. I test his son's capabilities early on in the field and entrust him with increasingly important missions. In 1302 before Christ, with only a few years of military training, Ramesses appointed commander of the Southern Army. At that time, such an appointment places a young prince at the head of a strategic segment of the Egyptian forces. The Southern Army, based in Upper Egypt and extending to Nubia, protects the vital corridor from which gold and other essential riches for the pharaonic treasury originate. Although entrusting this responsibility to young man raises questions among the more experienced officers, Seti-Thurfi has undoubtedly made a preliminary selection. Ramesses has already proven his talent in reviewing troops, conducting tactical exercises, and imposing his authority. Under the guidance of seasoned generals, he holds a position that demands respect. Fragmentary records suggest he leads a campaign in Libya, perhaps as a learning operation, modest compared to the wars against the Hittites. This campaign is a real training ground away from the safety of garrisons. Ramesses has to manage supplies, movements, and negotiations with local tribes. Every confrontation is a lesson. Libya, a feared neighbor for its nomadic warriors, represents a constant threat to Egypt, especially in the Delta area, less protected by the deserts. The Southern Army sent to reinforce the garrisons faces difficult terrain and adversaries mastering guerrilla tactics. Ramesses learns to coordinate cavalry and infantry, to maintain horses and to hold advanced positions in extreme conditions with limited access to water and food. This campaign is credited with laying the foundation of his reputation as a young commander. According to chronicles, his bravery was not mere flattery. He would step into the front lines to encourage his men, never succumbing to recklessness. As operations progress, Seti-the increasingly integrates Ramesses into the workings of imperial policy, marking the beginning of the choregency. Though not systematic in ancient Egypt, choregency ensures a smooth northern, especially when the sovereign wishes to prepare his successor. By 1279, several sources officially mention Ramesses in royal inscriptions, his cartouches appearing alongside those of Seti-Thoth's. This means that the young prince is already sharing royal prerogatives. He can give orders, supervise projects, and appear before the army as its future sovereign. The presence of two names in neighboring cartouches gives the impression of a gradual transmission of power. The priests, key actors in the religious staging, compose hymns and celebrate rituals associating the two figures. Seti-Thufing, the living embodiment of the god Horus, and Ramesses, is divine continuity. In temples, they are sometimes depicted together, receiving offerings or participating in ceremonies. This choregency undoubtedly bolsters Ramesses' legitimacy, reducing any contestation of his succession. Public recognition of Ramesses' shared power and the prestige gained from his military acts lead Seti to entrust him with concrete architectural responsibilities. This is how the mention of the project supervised by Ramesses appears. The construction of the White Wall, a nickname given to the Fothit city of Mendefa, later known as Memphis. Located at the southern tip of the delta, where the Nile branches out, Memphis holds major strategic and symbolic importance. Already ancient at the time of Ramesses, it undergoes constant modifications to become an administrative, military, and religious center. The White Wall refers to the massive ramparts built to defend the city. Their light color due to limestone gives them this popular name. Ramesses may not have been the main architect, but he supervised the coordination of resources, the enlistment of labor, and the supply of stone and wood, all while adhering to a schedule that utilized farmers outside of planting and harvest seasons. On the site, he organized the work of thousands of men, ensuring discipline and remuneration in the form of rations. The prince sometimes conducted surprise inspections to check on the wall's progress or question a foreman about missing supplies, and his movements were systematically recorded by the scribes. By supervising large-scale projects, Ramesses becomes aware of the heavy responsibility of the future builder king. The great empire he would inherit needs solid infrastructures to assert itself against neighbors and maintain the unity of the Egyptian population. Although administrative archives are fragmented, they reveal the considerable sums invested in the fortification of Mendefa, such as the purchase of 11 cent, wood for the gates, or Sinai copper for tools. These projects require strict control of the fiscal administration, the king's treasury. Supervising the White Wall allows Ramesses to work directly with the local elites and religious authorities of Memphis. The great temples, like the one dedicated to Petal, exert strong influence. Ramesses has to negotiate the requisition of materials and land, while ensuring the support of the people to exploit these skills to secure his personal glory. He would abundantly decorate the temples, erect colossal statues, and have his name engraved on many pylons, thus guaranteeing his presence in the collective memory. This construction experience serves as a rehearsal for the great builder he would become. Throughout these stages, the young co-regent strengthens his authority without encroaching on his father's. He respects setting the rest of the decisions, collaborates with his advisors, and continues the restoration policy undertaken after the Amoranian heresy. Ramesses learns to combine innovations with respect for traditions. Far than a soldier, he already sees himself as a protector of the temples, an intermediary between the gods and his people, and an administrator concerned with the well-being of his subjects. By the end of this phase of youth and co-regency, Ramesses has demonstrated not only his mastery of the bow and chariot, but also his ability to lead campaigns, coordinate fortified sites, and integrate into religious rituals. In an Egypt attached to symbols, the presence of his names alongside those of Seti Thorn ensures the continuity of the lineage. The royal entourage knows that by entrusting prerogatives to his son, Seti Thorn is preparing the future great pharaoh. From this period, Ramesses' greatness is taking shape. A courageous, educated young man, ready to wear the double crown to continue the Ramesses dynasty and imprint his name in stone. Thanks to his military upbringing and role as co-regent, Ramesses gains the trust of the army, the priests and the people. He has proven his ability to converse with generals, organized expeditions, and managed conflicts. Through his symbolic gestures, he legitimizes his religious authority. In a kingdom where Mount cosmic order and justice as paramount, he embodies the harmony between strength, wisdom, and piety, necessary conditions for governance. When he succeeds Seti Thorn, he will do so without hesitation, strong from his victories, his education, and the legitimacy acquired during the co-regency. When Seti Thorn took his last breath in 2079 before Christ, the Thorn of Egypt passed to Ramesses II, who was only 24 years old. This was a major point in the history of the Nile Valley, as Ramesses inherited a vast empire, a well-established bureaucracy, and an experienced army, particularly in military campaigns in the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. Although young for a pharaoh, Ramesses II had already acquired strong martial and administrative training alongside his father. His reign thus began under the signs of continuity and a desire to leave a lasting mark on Egyptian history. The death of Seti Thorn, this builder king, shocked the local population. However, upon the announcement of Ramesses II's accession, the priests and court dignitaries quickly managed to channel the popular fervor. According to custom, the new sovereign had to be recognized as the earthly embodiment of the god Horus, thereby ensuring his legitimacy. The temples of Amun, Tata, and of Cyrus then resonated with rituals to accompany Seti Thorn's Thurson into the afterlife and celebrate the accession of Ramesses II, now ennised with quasi-divine prerogatives. Aware of the weight of succession and the need to assert himself at the beginning of his reign, Ramesses II organized a vast triumphant tour of Egypt, following his father's funeral ceremonies. Extending from the Nile Delta in the north to Upper Egypt in the south, this political and religious tour was distinguished by spectacular processions, decorated chariots, banner-bearers, musicians with systems and tambourines, and sacred chants resonating in front of the temples. The inhabitants gathered on the banks, hoping to catch a glimpse of the youthful face of the pharaoh, adorned with the blue war crown, or the Dibble crown. During this tour, Ramesses II laid the foundation stone of the Ramesseum, a memorial temple intended to glorify his reign. Located on the west bank of Thebes' modern-day Rexar, this complex was to embody the power of the sovereign and his religious commitment. Imagine a large open courtyard, bordered by massive colonnades leading to a hypostyle hall. The colossal bas-reliefs and detailed sculptures depicted Ramesses II's divine lineage and military achievements. At the time of laying the first stone, only the foundations were visible, but the audacity of the project and the energy of the pharaoh foreshadowed the grandeur of this edifice. From the start of his initial works, Ramesses II turned his attention to consolidating the northeastern borders of Egypt, a strategic region already marked by unstable ties with the Levant. Coastal cities like Gaza and Byblos were crucial for maritime trade, while land routes served as corridors for armies and trading caravans. Setid the Wine and his predecessors had conducted campaigns to maintain their authority, as this area was coveted by powers like the Hittite Empire. This struggle for control of cities and trade roads would become decisive for Egypt throughout the New Kingdom. By the second year of his reign, around 2078 before Christ, Ramesses II led a military expedition to Gaza. He aimed to affirm Egypt's presence and reassert his suzerainty over the Canaanite cities. The royal army, composed of infantry and chariots, departed from Pi-Ramesses in the eastern delta, following the Mediterranean coast. The campaign, well documented by stelae in various temples, subdued several rebellious or ambiguous localities. Gaza, well fortified and fearing Hittite expansion, surrendered quickly and chose to negotiate a status quo with Ramesses. The Egyptian army avoided a prolonged siege and swiftly installed garrisons, thereby reinforcing pharaonic authority. In the third year of his reign, Ramesses II turned his attention to Byblos. Now, located in Levant, the city had long maintained fluctuating relations with Egypt, particularly due to the trade this would. Unlike the swift campaign against Gaza, this operation required more negotiations and demonstrations of power. Byblos, prosperous thanks to its maritime trade, enjoyed notable autonomy. Ramesses that maneuvered skillfully to preserve this partnership, while asserting his political hold. He did not conduct a siege, but managed to secure the city's full cooperation, which began to pay a regular tribute to Egypt. In the fourth year of his reign, Shardana pirates intercepted its sea, threatening ships, and the Levantine coast caught the attention of the scribes, possibly originating from the western Mediterranean or itinerant mercenaries. The Shardana were already known during study. The farm's time, surprised by the rapid action of the Egyptian fleet, a contingent was cast and brought before Ramesses II. Rather than executing them or reducing them to slavery, the pharaoh decided to recruit them as personal guards and military auxiliaries, a strategic decision. Exploiting their maritime experience, the Shardana entered the service of Egypt, settling in camps along the delta, adopting the codes of the ferry on a court. These military and diplomatic successes fueled propaganda intended to engrave the glory of Ramesses II in stone. Aware of the importance of religious and political communication, the pharaoh commissioned the writing of a campaign journal inscribed on the walls of temples, notably at Karnak. This practice ensured the longevity of the royal memory and offered priests, administrators, and visitors a narrative of pharaonic heroism. At Karnak, the grand temple dedicated to Ammon, massive columns and giant pylons served as a backdrop for sculpted scenes. There, the king appeared, chariot rushing at full speed towards fleeing enemies or receiving the divine anointing of Ammon, symbol of his celestial legitimacy. A particular passage in these bas-reliefs fired a sensation, the anecdote of the topographical survey with the dagger's tip. According to this account, during a maneuver in enemy territory or on a recently conquered battlefield, Ramesses that can allegedly use the tip of his dagger to map the landscape, engraving markers into the hardened ground. Although more pragmatically, A simple survey on a chart of pottery is more plausible. The legend painted a heroic portrait of the sovereign, a cunning leader mastering military strategy, even in the art of cartography. This theatrical gesture, carved in stone, aimed to demonstrate the ingenuity of Ramesses and to inspire admiration from future generations. In just a few years, Ramesses II strengthened his internal and external authority within the kingdom. Nobility, priests, and army supported his expansionist policy, ending the independence aspirations of Canaanite cities. In Asia, the control of territories brought considerable economic advantages to Egypt. Commercial passage rights, access to raw materials, wood, copper, silver, and protection of trade flows. Egypt, far from being isolated, maintained exchanges with the Near East, Crete, Cyprus, and even some European regions, weaving a network of cultural and political influences with the Hittite Empire and the Assyrian kingdom playing a key role. In his consolidation drive, Ramesses II strategically dispersed troops and administrators, military stations at Gaza and other key points along the coast, secured the access leading to 11 team ports, housing fortified forts for resupply and exchange. Egyptian scribes recorded all the details: soldiers, grain stocks, equipment, and tributes paid by local cities. These administrative systems, confirmed by tablets and inscriptions, ensured efficient logistics. Information circulated along the Nile to decision centers, enabling the pharaoh to command new campaigns and plan other architectural projects with confidence. Royal propaganda reinforced the image of an omnipresent monarch, both an intrepid warrior and an implacable administrator. The early Asian campaigns and the construction of the Ramesses theorem will illustrate Ramesses' Thickens' overall logic. Each victory was engraved in marble, and each subdued city indirectly contributed to the embellishment of Egypt's temples. Tributes from Gaza and Byblos financed the workforce, the arrival of rare materials, and the casting of bronze for giant statues. War captives turned into skilled workers, participated in the extraction and transport of monumental stones. Thus, each chisel strike in the sandstone or limestone echoed the victorious campaigns. The integration of the Shardana pirates into the royal guard reinforced the propaganda of a feared and generous sovereign capable of transforming enemies into protectors. In the Egyptian collective unconscious, these initial campaigns marked a renewal, a clear sign that the warrior tradition of the pharaohs of the new kingdom, like Thutmose III and Seti I, endured. For a modern audience, one might compare the effect of these announcements to that of contemporary political communication: strong and visible leadership, conveyed through temples and reliefs which replaced our newspapers and televisions, through religious inscriptions, ritual protocols, and solemn baths. Reliefs, the royal narrative erased all shadows, leaving only a story glorifying Ramesses II, always the victor, protected by the gods. In conclusion, the first years of Ramesses II's reign, from 1279 to 1276 before Christ, reveal a young sovereign determined to leave a lasting mark on the history of Egypt. After Seti I's death, his accession to the throne transformed into a demonstration of strength at the borders. The capture of Gaza and the submission of Byblos illustrated Egypt's conquering ambition, while the recruitment of the Shardana pirates showed the pharaoh's diplomatic skill. The laying of the first stone of the Ramesses symbolized his project of glorification, celebrating his military victories and royal heritage. The engravings of Karnak, such as the topographic survey at the point of a dagger, told his story carved in stone to fascinate and transmit his image to future generations. At 24 years old, Ramesses the Son asserted his stature as a sovereign and visionary monarch, ready to inscribe his name in the history of the new kingdom. In the 5th year of Ramesses II's reign, in 1274 before Christ, Egypt and the Hittite Empire found themselves on the brink of a major confrontation at Kadesh, a fortified city near the Orontes River in present-day Syria. This battle stemmed from diplomatic and ethnic rivalries, with Ramesses II confirmed at the head of Egypt, seeking to secure the trade route between the Nile and the Levantine coast. As for Mu'tali's Saku, the Hittite king, he had to push back Egyptian expansion into northern Syria. The preparations were intense. Ramesses relied on his reputation as an ambitious young pharaoh, while Mu'tali relied on the element of surprise and the power of his chariots. The two empires marched toward an inevitable collision. The roads leading to Kadesh were long and dusty. The Egyptian forces, divided into 4 large units, advanced gradually, each named after a major deity, converging on the city to take control of it. Scouts scanned the horizon, but information on Hittites remained vague. Messengers reported contradictory information, and the exact position of Mu'tali's army remained uncertain. This information was part of the game, and the adversary was known for his cunning strategy. The atmosphere was tense, and each captain awaited Ramesses' order to maneuver as soon as the enemy position was confirmed. In this context occurs one of the most famous manipulations of military intelligence of antiquity, often called the Egyptian fiasco, or triumph of Hittite cunning. As Egyptian vanguard captured 2 men claiming to be Hittite deserters, they asserted that Mu'tali's army was still far from Kadesh, retreating to avoid a direct confrontation. Believing to hold crucial information, the Egyptian officers brought them before Ramesses II, who, eager to quickly secure the city, trusted their words. However, these deserters were impostors sent by the Hittites to mislead Egypt. This ruse led Ramesses to split his troops to early and advance towards Kadesh, overestimating his security. The Hittite army hidden nearby prepared to strike. Ramesses' second troops were organized into 4 main divisions, named in honor of the great Egyptian deities, Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth, each bearing a symbol of sacred protection and determination. In the soldiers' imagination, the strength of Amun triumphed, the light of Ra dispelled darkness, the power of Ptah established a new order, and the Hidira of Seth crushed all resistance. These divisions advanced in a coordinated manner, with Amun leading, followed by Raya, while Ptah and Seth progressed further south. The Egyptian chariots, light and swift, allowed archers to attack quickly and retreat to make way for the infantry. This tactic worked well on open terrain, but could be vulnerable to surprise attacks from wooded or hilly areas. Mu'tali II amassed an impressive army, with more than 2,000 heavy chariots, according to Egyptian inscriptions, although the exact numbers are debated. Each Hittite chariot, more robust and heavy, carries 3 fighters, a driver, a lancer or a javelin thrower, and a shield bearer. This configuration allows for great striking power in a charge, but with reduced maneuverability. Mu'tali dispersed his forces to surprise the Egyptian army, planning to attack when the Amun division is still scattered. Deceived by fake deserters, Ramses thinks the coast is clear and sets up the Simbel Amun division near Kadesh, but instead of finding a disorganized garrison, he discovers that the enemy is very close. Scouts capture new prisoners, who revealed that the Hittite army is hiding Hoin, the other side of Kadesh, ready to attack. Too late, Mu'tali orders the charge of his 2,000 chariots, which brutally emerged between the Amun division and the threat of the Egyptian army. The Re division is still far, and Ptah and Seth are further back. The Hittite army, coming from the northwest, crushes the Egyptian outposts. According to official accounts, there is panic. The Amun division finds itself isolated, and Ramses is cornered, threatened with encirclement by a tide of enemy chariots. In the tumult of battle, Ramses stands among his soldiers, seeking to rally the troops in disarray. The Egyptian sources, essentially propagandistic, praise the bravery of the pharaoh, alone among thousands of enemies, shield raised and bow in hand, leading a heroic fight. The Amun division, trapped, is overwhelmed. The reliefs of the Ramesseum and the temples of Karnak undoubtedly amplify the heroism of Ramses. and the anarchy of the Egyptian army. However, the king is said to have repelled several Hittite chariots in a desperate struggle. The historical reality is probably less romanticized. Ramses caught off guard, and vulnerable must improvise. The losses are heavy, but the Hittites failed to completely encircle the royal camp due to the prevailing confusion. At the same time, a decisive turning point occurs with the arrival of the Nenans from Amurru, mercenary troops allied with Egypt, following a diplomatic reversal. By attacking the Hittites from their rear, they surprise the enemy and break the momentum of the Hittite charge. This counterattack allows Ramses to reorganize his remaining units. The trumpets sound while the motivated Nerans push back the Hittites. The Ammon division regains its composure, and the Re division, alerted by the tumult, rushes to provide reinforcement. The Pecha division stationed further away receives the order to come and reinforcement despite the distance. Their arrival, perceived as the saving grace, reinforces the surprise effect created by the Nerans of Amurru. Once reorganized, the faster Egyptian chariots begin to effectively target the Hittites. The archers unleash valleys of arrows, sowing confusion among the enemy, who struggles on slippery and crowded ground. The Hittite section attempting to bypass the area finds itself overwhelmed by coordinated Egyptian assaults. Martali, aware of the danger, tries to position his troops, but the Egyptian momentum is irresistible. Faced with the Egyptian reinforcements, the 2,000 Hittite chariots lose their tactical advantage. The shock has been violent, but the element of surprise fades. Aware of the possible losses, Mu'tali orders the retreat. Some historians believe he aimed for a strategic victory to force negotiations. However, trapped, he resigns himself to a hasty withdrawal, leaving behind part of his infantry. Kadesh does not fall, and the battle ends in a stalemate. Ramses proclaims victory by having survived, while Mu'tali celebrates having slowed the Egyptian advance. Beyond the realities of the confrontation, Ramses II propaganda transforms the event into a grandiose feat, claiming he faced thousands of enemies alone. Although this exaggeration serves to enhance his prestige, Kadesh becomes the symbol of Egyptian military supremacy. It is the first conflict abundantly documented on temple walls, with varied versions of the battle engraved at Luxor, Abydos, and in the Ramesseum. These accounts, while narrating facts, aim to magnify the image of pharaonic power. A famous scene from the Ramesseum illustrates this glorification. Ramses, on his chariot, bow drawn, vanquishes his enemies. Amen takes the reins of the royal chariot, symbolizing the Vivian alliance between the pharaoh and the tutelary deity. The message is clear. Ramses' survival against chaos is the work of the gods. This iconography reinforces the idea that in the event of defeat, the pharaoh remains supported by the divine, a heroic, invincible sovereign linked to the cosmic order. In the 5th year of Anansi's second reign, the Battle of Kadesh marked a turning point in his career as a conqueror. The deception of the false Hittite disorders and the failure of Egyptian intelligence almost proved costly, but the arrival of the nearing from Amurru and the division of Tours saved the situation. Although the military result was ambiguous, Egypt proclaimed its victory and immortalized the image of an invincible pharaoh in the temples. From the 6th year of his reign, Ramses II faced a complex situation in the Levant, where Egypt and the Hittite Empire vied for influence over the border territories. Between years 6 and 16, after intense military wars, the two powers engaged in defense operations and long diplomatic negotiations. Although this period is less famous than the Battle of Kadesh, it was crucial for transforming persistent hostility into a lasting peace between Egypt and the Hittites. During these years of rivalry, Egyptian and Hittite forces focused on controlling trade routes and strategic points, adopting a strategy of garrisons, raids, and citadel takeovers. The Egyptians sought to secure the Levant, where the Canaanite city-states were politically unstable, while the Hittites consolidated their gains and monitored their vassals. The war of attrition that extended from year 6 to year 16 created constant tension in the region. Among the strategic positions, Beth Shan occupied a key place. Located in the Jordan Valley, it controlled crucial trade routes between the coast and the interior. The Egyptian administration invested heavily to build a fortress capable of repelling Hittite or Canaanite incursions. The walls, made of mud bricks and reinforced with quadrangular bastions, housed warehouses, armories, and common rooms for soldiers. This project, launched around year 7, made Beth Shan a major defensive pivot. Simultaneously, the Hittite Empire under Muwatalli II and his successors reinforced its southern borders and forged alliances with some local kingdoms. The Hittites exerted variable pressure on their vassal cities, alternating military support and taxation. While Ramses II was building fortifications, the Hittites were establishing themselves in Carchemish, a strategic center of Upper Syria. This climate of mutual influence promoted the mediation of local cities or princes who played on promises of protection and wealth to navigate between the two powers. The Levant thus remained a geopolitical crossroads where loyalty was Wanyard's. As the positional wars prolonged, Egypt and the Hittite Empire began to weigh the human and economic costs of these conflicts. Each campaign required provisions, livestock, materials, and mercenaries, while conscripted peasants saw their agricultural production affected, subjugated. Cities revolted when the promised protection failed. Faced with these difficulties, some of Ramses II's advisors from the clergy or the administration of Pi-Ramesses proposed long-term diplomatic solutions. Similarly, in the Hittite camp, officers urged the royal court to negotiate, fearing a reversal of the power panel with Egypt. Wishing to consolidate his authority and protect his conquests, Ramses II began talks with the Hittite court around his 10th or 11th year of reign. The goal was to stabilize the borders, even without immediate peace. The negotiations were tense, but a provisional agreement emerged. Meanwhile, skirmishes still broke out around contested cities, but discussions continued. Scribes drafted missiles on Q&A form, and papyrus and emissaries traveled long distances to convey their sovereign's proposals. This informal diplomacy laid the foundations for rapprochement, although the idea of a definitive truce remained uncertain. Starting from the 16th year, tensions began to ease, paving the way for formal negotiations. Ramses II sent several delegations through Hattusha to propose a non-aggression pact. The Hittites, faced with cost of war and threats on their other borders, were also motivated by peace. Exchanges of diplomatic gifts such as jewelry and luxury goods followed. Although the details of the agreements remained unclear, they alleviated hostilities and set the stage for rapprochement, culminating in the major diplomatic event of Year 21. Year 21 of Ramses Tuesday marks a major turning point with diplomatic marriage between the pharaoh and the Hittite princess Nefertari, symbolizing the end of decades of hostility and the beginning of mutual cooperation. Nefertari, accompanied by her entourage, arrived in Egypt with a dowry, including gold, silver, precious stones, mackerels, and livestock. Ramses II, to celebrate this event, organized a lavish reception with religious possessions and banquets. Through this union, he hoped to strengthen his influence in the Levant and seal a lasting agreement with the Hittites. The diplomatic marriage between Ramses Hittite and Nefertari was merely a milestone toward the peace, formalized by an unprecedented treaty. Engraved on silver tablets, symbols of sincerity, this agreement was deposited in Luxor and Susa. It established a clause of mutual assistance in case of external aggression, marking a major diplomatic advance. Two powers endowed themselves with a defensive cooperation rather than simple truces. The text, written in solemn language, called upon the gods to guarantee this commitment. This decision had a lasting impact on regional relations. The treaty included an innovative provision for the time: the exchange of political fugitives. In the 13th century before Christ, refugees from the fallen nobility often sought asylum with rival powers to be used to destabilize enemies. Ramses II and the Hittite sovereign committed to returning any individual seeking protection provided they belonged to the other kingdom. This first extradition clause acknowledged the mutual insurcerability. This measure illustrates the spirit of compromise between two former rivals and opened a new era of regional stability. Under the long reign of Ramesses II, Egypt reached an architectural peak. The pharaoh launched an ambitious construction program, marking history with technical innovations. This period, often referred to as a golden age of architecture, saw the foundation of new sites, such as the temples of Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, and foundations dedicated to Queen Nefertari. These accomplishments glorified royal power and divine protection, while projecting a triumphant image supported by engineering feats. Pi-Ramesses, sometimes called Pi-Ramesses, was one of Ramesses II's most ambitious projects. Its establishment in the Nile Delta near the ancient city of Everest also marked a departure from Theban sphere. Thus, Pi-Ramesses became a symbol of the renewal of pharaonic authority and the dynasty's triumph over past invaders. On the outskirts of the city, Ramesses II built a monumental palace, partially constructed on stilts to protect from floods and marshes, which served as an administrative and military center. The architecture of Pi-Ramesses was distinguished by large avenues lined with sphinxes leading to sacred precincts, housing sanctuaries dedicated to the pharaoh's tutelary gods. Residential quarters were arranged for a varied population: Egyptian settlers, prisoners of war turned into workforce, scribes, and craftsmen coming from various regions. The military aspect of the city was expressed through chariot docks, artificial basins, and quays for the maintenance and berthing of chariot units. Connected by canals, these facilities ensured quick logistics between garrisons, and the river fleet, guaranteeing effective military control. Pi-Ramesses imposed an image of wealth and power, symbolizing Ramesses II's will to dominate the region, most exposed external threats. Among the other major achievements of this period, Abu Simbel stands out for its bold construction and strategic location in Lower Nubia. It is a key sector for Egyptian domination over the gold routes and trade towards the inner Africa. The complex, consisting of two rock-cut sanctuaries, houses a large temple dedicated to Ramses II and the gods Amun-Ra, Ra-Harakti, and Tas. Four monumental colossi, about 20 meters high, guard the entrance, symbolizing the grandeur of the monarch. The interior, carved into the rock, contains several rooms decorated with bas-reliefs depicting his military victories and devotion to the Egyptian pantheon. One of the most remarkable features of Abu Simbel is its biannual solar alignment. Twice a year, on February 22 and October 22, the first rays of the sun penetrate the inner chamber, illuminating the statues of Amun-Ra, Ra-Harakti, and Ramses. This phenomenon demonstrates the exceptional precision of the architects and astronomers of the time, highlighting the meticulous intention connect the pharaoh to cosmic and divine forces. At the time, royal power was perceived as an extension of celestial order, thus reinforcing the quasi-divine status of the ruler. Next to the main temple, a sanctuary was dedicated to Queen Nefertari, Ramses II's favorite wife, and to the goddess Hathor, who embodies music, dance, love, and motherhood. Her presence on the facade, sculpted on the same scale as the pharaoh, has demonstrated her role at court and the influence she wielded. This sanctuary marks a shift in the portrayal of the royal couple, emphasizing the association between the power of the throne and the benevolence of the queen. Technically, the completion of Abu Simbel required specialized teams in rock excavation, sculpture, and pictorial decoration. The logistics, including the transportation of tools, management of provisions, and coordination of the project in the Nubian terrain, depended on the mastery of the Nile and the hard work of the laborers. Traveling up the Nile to the north, one reaches the Ramesseum, located in the Thebes on the west bank, opposite the modern city of Luxor. This mortuary temple, dedicated to the tradition of his predecessors by ensuring the presence of the pharaoh beyond his death. The Ramesseum is distinguished by its imposing structure, with several pylons, vast courtyards, and a richly decorated hypostyle hall. The reliefs depict scenes from the Battle of Kadesh and other military exploits. The site also housed annex buildings such as storage facilities, granaries, and dependencies for the administration of the cult domain. One of the masterpieces of the Ramesseum was a colossal statue of Ramesses II, carved from a 20-meter-high block of granite and weighing several hundred tons. Its size impressed ancient chroniclers, and even after its partial collapse, it inspired the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley's centuries later, evoking the lost glory of a once all-powerful name. The name Ozymandias derives from a Hellenized version of Ramses' thin user Matre and Egyptian. For modern viewers, this poem embodies the passage of time over past glories, while reminding that the memory of Ramses II endures through these monumental remains. In addition to the iconic sites, Ramses II erected a series of temples and Nubia. Among these constructions, the temples dedicated to Queen Nefertari at Beit el-Wali, Wadi Isibua, and other localities to the south stand out. Beit el-Wali, a small rock-cut temple, is adorned with reliefs illustrating Ramses' triumphs over the southern enemies and offerings to protective deities. These places of worship, often carved into cliffs, are constructed from local sandstone, demonstrate great technical mastery in excavation and decoration, exploiting the solidity and warm use of Nubian sandstone to enhance the sculptures. The use of Nubian sandstone in Ramses' architecture illustrates the diversity of materials employed to emphasize cultic grandeur and royal splendor. While the Nile Valley primarily provided limestone and alabaster for Theban constructions, Nubia offered a robust sandstone, ideal for the reliefs of vast reliefs decorating temples. Each material was chosen for its resistance to weather, aesthetics, and logistical availability, integrating into Ramses II's vast architectural project, aimed at unifying and magnifying his empire. Through these temples dedicated to Nefertari, he demonstrated royal authority at the heart of strategic regions for Egypt. Among the many projects of Ramses II, a significant event occurred. A pylon under construction collapsed abruptly when it was almost completed. Although the exact location of the accident is debated, some researchers attribute it to the Ramesseum or an extension of the complex at Pi-Ramesses. The collapse likely caused human losses and significant damage, impacting the continuation of the project and the distribution of imperial resources. In Egyptian religion, where the pharaoh was responsible for cosmic balance, such a disaster risk being interpreted as a bad omen. Ramses II's reaction was commensurate with his prestige. He ordered funerary donations and expiatory ceremonies to appease the gods' anger and protect the remaining workers. The records mentioned offerings of grains, cattle, and valuable goods to the temples, as well as a partial amnesty for certain taxpayers, probably to avoid uprisings. Many grieving families also received compensation, one of the first examples of victim indemnification, although the concept differs from our current standards. This record of funerary donations reflects Ramses II's desire to reaffirm through this dramatic episode the protective bond he maintained with his people, although the aim was also political and religious. The incident did not slow down the work, as the royal court still had asked resources from victorious military campaigns and control of trade routes. The teams of architects and workers resumed their work, sometimes modifying the plans to strengthen stability or foundations. This episode shows the complexity of the logistical management and coordination necessary to erect such monuments, which were not merely territorial expansions, but gestures of fighting. The golden age of architecture under Ramses II bears witness to a period of artistic and technical abundance aimed at magnifying royal power and affirming dynastic legitimacy. Pi-Ramesses embodied the renewal of a military capital turned toward Asia, while Abu Simbel combined nature and astronomy to glorify the sacred figure of the pharaoh. The Ramesseum offered a monumental vision of royal ego, immortalizing Ramses II's victories and divine connection. The temples dedicated to Nefertari highlighted the queen's importance, associating the grandeur of the sovereign with that of the goddess Hathor. The pylon's accident reminded of the fragility of human endeavors, even the most ambitious. Despite this incident, Ramses II affirmed his determination to dominate space and time, thereby reinforcing his aura as an all-powerful leader. More than 3 millennia later, these achievements continued to fascinate specialists and travelers, embodying the apotheosis of an Antentor program that imposed Ramses II's name on posterity as an exceptional builder. Each site was crafted with extreme care, incorporating religious, political, aesthetic, and astronomical considerations. The strategic distribution of buildings and mobilized resources transformed Egypt's topography, marking the universal history of architecture. The memory of Ramses II, reinforced by the beauty of his monuments, endures in the stories, myths, and poems that perpetuate the voice of the ones, sometimes called the Great. In the heart of Ramses II's power, court life was an impressive spectacle, both for Egyptians and foreign emissaries. The pharaoh, the pivot of power, organized his administration with a balance between centralization and delegation, surrounded by competent officials. In his palace, the arrangement of audience chambers and sacred spaces reinforced His Majesty. Dignitaries would pass through these places to request favors or offer gifts, with every hierarchical detail and protocol affirming his position. The royal family, occupying key positions, supported the arts and cults, preserving the tradition and continuity of the dynasty. Thus, the court formed a hierarchical microcosm, reflecting the structure of the Egyptian state and contributing to the glory of Ramses II. Among the most influential female figures, Nefertari embodied both grace and power. Her name, meaning the most beautiful, reflected their prestige. Her tomb, Corvi 66, is one of the marvels of the Valley of the Queens, with frescoes illustrating her cosmic role, portraying her as the one for whom the sun rises. Beyond her marital status, Nefertari played a political and religious role. Han, accompanying Ramses II during rituals and sometimes orchestrating ceremonies. She also intervened to support cities seeking favors and supervise the management of her lands, ensuring their prosperity. In official representations, she appeared as the king's partner and guarantor of divine fertility, thus contributing to the ideological portrayal of the royal couple, symbolizing the country's stability. Set-no-Fret, another great wife of Ramses II, occupied a privileged position at the top of the royal hierarchy. Less famous than Nefertari, she played a central role managing the royal domain, overseeing sanctuaries and divine offerings. Her lands provided grains and livestock to the court, ensuring the palace's autonomy. Her influence was manifested in public ceremonies where she sometimes appeared alongside Nefertari, symbolizing the unity of the two queens. She was also involved in the appointment of governors and stewards, a testament to her authority beyond the domestic sphere. Receiving foreign emissaries in the absence of Nefertari, she played a diplomatic role. The coexistence of these wives reflected the complexity of pharaonic power, both shared among several women, contributing to the stability of the dynastic system established by Ramses II. Among the 100 children of Ramses II, several princes and princesses played a key role in the management of the kingdom. Each received an education tailored to their future roles: warfare, diplomacy, or organization of cults. Set stood out for his initiatives in monument conservation, overseeing the restoration of ancient temples and tombs, thus reinforcing dynastic legitimacy. Merneptah strove to become the direct heir to the throne. Ramses II's large offspring were not a sign of prestige. They served to create a network of governors, priests, and officers, consolidating royal control. This family entanglement strengthened the administration, with each member working for the royal household's prosperity and the glory of the Ramessides. To fund his resplendent court, Ramses II introduced a major fiscal Reform. The Book of Gold Income catalogued Nubian mines, the amount of gold extracted, and the workforce, having control over collection, fraud prevention, and centralized distribution of ingots. Gold was essential for ritual objects and rewarding officials. Scribes used the demonic form to quickly record data. The reform also covered agropastoral production, ensuring the court's sustenance and market stability. Thanks to precise archives, the administration could plan public works and supply temples. This harmonious system unified dynasty, officials and peasants, supporting the growth of court life and the prestige of Ramses II. The tax became a decisive lever of dynastic success. Under Ramses the Sound, the Egyptian bureaucracy was organized into multiple levels. The viziers centralized reports from the provinces, while secret scribes recorded and transmitted crucial information. The use of demonic script, faster than hieroglyphs, allowed for the massive production of administrative documents. Regional representatives, often from the nobility or the royal family, managed local taxes, coordinated irrigation, and mustered troops when needed. Each level depended on the efficiency of communications, facilitated by river routes and a network of messengers. Local courts, composed of judges and scribes, handled disputes under the final supervision of the viziers. This administrative system, supported by the Chateau fixed press to send decrees and judgments, allowed the state to maintain tight control over society. This network reinforced the order desired by Ramses' theft. Within the palace, the daily splendor reflected the prosperity maintained by Ramses II's administration. Banquets accompanied by music and refined dishes were occasions to reward the king's servants and forge alliances between dignitaries. Each participant received symbolic gifts, gold necklaces or precious incense. These ceremonies strengthened ties with the king's supporters, with the great wives enhancing their influence by distributing luxurious products. Scribes recorded each gift, ensuring traceability of royal largesse. These events dissipated tensions and rivalries, regulating the flow of precious goods. The people, though more distant from power, saw in these rituals the proof of a shared prosperity. The abundance displayed by the court reflected the efficiency of a well-oiled bureaucratic apparatus whose prosperity reverberated throughout the provinces. Ultimately, life at court and the administration under Ramses II embodied two complementary aspects: a dazzling splendor to display the pharaoh's power and a methodical organization to manage a vast and diverse empire. The great royal wives, such as Nefertari and Nefret, played major roles beyond the conjugal domain, engaging in politics, religion, and diplomacy. Princes, such as Camazet and Meneptah, reinforced this organization with their specialized training and recognized authority. Fiscal reforms, symbolized by the Book of Golden Income and the adoption of demonic script, facilitated the recording of wealth. Local courts and the Chadaf Express consolidated internal cohesion. At every level, the court embodied the heart of a sprawling power. Under Ramses II, this administrative edifice marked one of the most enduring periods of the New Kingdom, closing the Egyptian administrative golden age. After the uprisings and battles of the first decades of his reign, Ramses II managed to consolidate his conquests and establish internal stability that marked the second part of his long reign. Armed with a well-organized administrative network, he turned to the southern and western borders to ensure lasting security and promote the kingdom's enrichment. His interventions in Nubia and Libya, as well as the promotion of trade across the Red Sea, bolstered the reputation of the Egyptian court. The political and economic stakes remained crucial, controlling the supply, raw materials, and asserting Egyptian supremacy over neighboring peoples. The royal administration perfected its governance methods and continued to develop a sophisticated military and social system. Diplomatic relations oscillated between negotiations and armed pressures, aiming to maintain a balance advantageous to the empire. The most striking example of this policy is found in Nubia, a region stretching From the first to the fourth cataract and beyond, Egypt had long recognized the wealth of this area, notably gold, ivory, and ebony. Ramses II inherited a tradition of Egyptian control over these lands, with his predecessors having already established force to secure a trade, settled the wine, had reconquered Nubian territories, and the installation of permanent garrisons under Ramses II reinforced royal authority. Each post, led by an officer, supervised a small number of soldiers and scribes, responsible for maintaining order and collecting taxes. These garrisons also served as relay points for convoys of goods and troops, traveling along the soil. At Solab, near the Third Cataract, the Egyptian army established a key position. Under Amenhotep III, a temple dedicated to Amun-Re had already been built, mark the divine presence and affirm the protection of the Egyptian gods. Ramses II continued this policy by sending new garrisons and consolidating the fortifications. The rock-hewn temples in Nubia symbolized the recurring of pharaonic religion, these remote regions. Although his complex at Habu Simbel is the most famous, Ramses II also focused on maintaining many other edifices, from small local sanctuaries to large temples. Nubia was not only a religious center, but also an economic crossroads for Egypt. It facilitated the transport of gold, ivory from the southern elephants, and ebony wood, prized for making furniture and luxurious decorations. The court's artisans used these materials to produce objects for the elites, thus reinforcing Egypt's cultural influence. The royal administration sent specialized scribes to account for the quantities taken and ensure the regularity of tributes. Expeditions to the south required boats adapted to the rapids. Provisions and secured routes involved complex logistics to avoid the dangers of hostile tribes. Its relative order on the Nubian frontier did not exclude vigilance. The local populations, although partially integrated into the pharaonic system, retained their traditions and did not always accept Egyptian domination. Small revolts erupted regularly, prompting Ramses II to react firmly. His temples and monuments, besides being places of worship, symbolized his power. Over this distant land, the army intervened to restore order, sometimes without major confrontations, sometimes through more muscular campaigns. Nonetheless, Nubia under Ramses II was marked by cultural expansion and the progressive assimilation of local elites into the Egyptian administration. This blend of military force and diplomatic integration enabled the empire to maintain stability on its southern border for much of his reign. On the western front, the situation was less stable. To the west of the Nile Delta lay semi-desert territories inhabited by Libyan tribes, including the Libu and the Mashwash, who herded cattle and moved in search of pastures. The border between Egypt and Libya, poorly defined, offered neither a clear, natural letter nor easily controllable frontier towns. Thus, faced with demographic pressure and challenging climatic conditions, these nomadic tribes sometimes entered the fertile plains of the delta, sometimes peacefully, sometimes by force. The reign of Ramses II experienced several incursions, sometimes in the form of raids, when clan leaders sought to reclaim cattle, grains, or other goods, of which the Egyptians were rich. Faced with this intermittent threat, Ramses VI led several military campaigns to push back or dissuade the Mashwash. The Egyptian animals, often auditory, exalt the king's victories, who, with strong arms, inflicted decisive defeats on the Libyans. Beyond royal propaganda, there were indeed confrontations where the Egyptian army used archers and chariots against the Libyan tribal fighters. Once defeated, they were required to pay tribute, often in the form of sacred bulls, important animals in Libyan culture. This confiscation symbolized a punishment, but also an economic gain for Egypt, marking the spirits and reaffirming the balance of power. Despite these numerous battles, Ramses' descent maintained a relative peace in Libya, stable enough not to divert Egypt from its other strategic objectives. Agreements with certain tribes, often in the form of matrimonial alliances or cattle tributes, curbed incursions. The Mashwash, after several defeats, had to nominally recognize the sovereignty. Ramses II. This did not erase their culture nor their warlike aspirations, but established a balance where Egypt, through its military might, deterred any major attack. Later Libyan pressure revived under other reigns, but in Ramses II, the situation did not degenerate into a generalized crisis, unlike what would happen in the declining new empire. Alongside terrestrial operations, the Egyptian court was also interested in the Red Sea to conduct strategic commercial enterprises. Since the 12th dynasty, expeditions to the land of Punt have been documented, although its exact location remains uncertain, probably in Somalia or Eritrea. Crossing the desert to the coast was a logistical challenge, organizing caravans, storing water, building suitable ships, and finding adequate ports. Under Ramses II, this maritime route continued to develop to back exotic goods prized by Egypt. The land of Punt mainly exported incense used in temples to mark the presence of the divine and purify sanctuaries. Precious woods were also brought back for use in the construction of coffers, statues, and ceremonial boats. Sacred baboons associated with the god Thoth held significant symbolic importance, representing the wealth and cosmopolitan nature of the empire. The scribes in charge of these missions wrote reports on papyrus, detailing the volumes of cargo, routes, and the workforce employed. They ensured that each expedition brought wealth and prestige to the court of Ramses II. Behind diplomatic and commercial successes, the royalty constantly had to ensure the morale and cohesion of its troops. Campaigns in Libya, Nubia, and the Levant left scars, injuries, diseases, and accidents reduced soldiers' capabilities to fight or work. For a state relying on its army, it was crucial to maintain a balance between mobilization and support for veterans. It was in this context that Ramses II is said to have decreed a tax exemption for soldiers who were disabled or too old, thus introducing the concept of military pensions. Although precise sources remain fragmentary, the royal administration acknowledged its debt to those who had risked their lives for the throne. According to several clues in administrative papyri and official inscriptions, this measure consisted of exempting veterans from contributions in kind, sometimes offering them grain rations or a plot of land to cultivate. This model, a precursor of social aid, reinforced the troops' loyalty to Pharaoh while alleviating the pressure on men unable to resume professional lives. Although the notion of war and validity was not formalized as it is today, this system established a unique precedent in military management in Egypt. This pension also demonstrated a sophisticated administration, typical of a strong state, possessing the resources and scribes necessary to manage records. In summary, the policy of Ramses II in Nubia, Libya, and the expeditions to Punt reflected a quest for balance between strength and prosperity. Internally, peace reigned with the elites dedicating themselves to religious matters and grand works, while trade fueled the economy with valuable materials. Military campaigns remained essential to maintaining this stability, with the prestige and tactical skill of the pharaoh deterring rebellions. Nubia, controlled by garrisons, brought in wealth. The Libyans no longer threatened the delta, and the route to the Red Sea opened new commercial horizons. This period presented the image of a reality through alliances or punishments, and innovating in the care of his loyal servants. The period, corresponding to this internal peace and peripheral campaigns, illustrates the political maturity of Ramses II. After the spectacular battles of his youth, he focused on consolidating his empire and creating lasting commercial and diplomatic ties, whether through the southern rock-cut temples, the influx of ivory and ebony, or the increased surveillance of the western borders. With the capture of sacred bulls, the pharaoh's authority was strengthened. The exchanges via the Red Sea also showed his ambition to integrate Egypt into a vast network of commercial connections. The tax exemption for disabled veterans demonstrates his concern for the condition of soldiers, while consolidating his image as a philanthropic and strategic sovereign. With hindsight, we better understand how Ramses II maintained his authority until an advanced age, as his military, diplomatic, and economic advances were not limited to mere conquests. His almost permanent presence in Nubia was part of a long-term policy of fortification, temple direction, and social framework for the populations. In Libya, the management of tribes and the recurrence of his operations allowed Egypt to contain the pressure from the desert, and in the Red Sea, the continuation of routes to Punt sealed the reputation of an empire open to maritime trade, amplifying the tradition of exchange initiated by his predecessors. This set of policies explains why Ramses II was perceived in Egyptian memory as a guarantor of prosperity, an exceptional administrator, and a tutelary figure of Egyptian power. This phase of internal peace and peripheral campaigns marks a period where internal and external forces align to create stability conducive to royal glory. Although the clashes in Nubia and Libya were violent, they aimed to preserve the unity of the empire and ensure the flow of vital resources. Ramses II and his administration understood the importance of developing the training and supporting the population, including injured soldiers. This aspect of Ramesside policy, which codified the privileges of the empire's defenders, was unprecedented. The kingdom's borders, well guarded and regularly inspected, did not experience major tensions, harboring lasting tranquility. Ramses' imprint left a lasting mark, giving posterity the image of said jubilees, one of the most spectacular moments at the end of his reign, testified to his exceptional longevity and his desire to stage his power. These ceremonies, inherited from an ancient tradition, celebrated the fickle and spiritual rebirth of the sovereign. The first said jubilee took place around his 30th year of reign, an achievement in itself for a pharaoh. Subsequently, other jubilees were organized to close intervals, notably in the years 33, 34, and 37, affirming the stability of his power and his determination to tend at his vigor before his subjects and the deities. The said jubilees, whose name refers to a complex ritual cycle, included rites established at the very beginning of the Egyptian monarchy. The king had to symbolically prove his ability to assume the sacred charge of kingship, both physically and mentally. The iconography often showed the pharaoh performing a ritual run around an enclosure wall, thus reaffirming his role as a living link between the gods and the people. In the scenes related to Ramses II, he runs energetically, sometimes accompanied by priests, illustrating his eternal youth. These images were engraved on the walls of temples or in cult rooms to preserve this accomplishment in collective memory and religious history. The first said jubilee allowed Ramses II to organize large public festivities where the offering of gifts to the gods was the main event. In the sanctuaries, colorful banners were raised and ritual music accompanied processions. The priests sang hymns to the glory of the sovereign, emphasizing his piety and his role as protector of the fancy. These celebrations were marked by songs, animal sacrifices, and libations in honor of the Egyptian deities, reaffirming the divine link between the pharaoh and the celestial powers. Outside the temples, banquets in the cities allow the population to share the joy of this moment. At the end of his reign, Ramses II completed several major architectural projects, some of which had been started in his youth. Among these works, the Hypostyle Hall of Karnak, an immense forest of columns, carved with reliefs, drew particular attention. Modern epigraphic studies show that Ramses II wanted to complete this fort space to reinforce his legitimacy and belonging to the lineage of pharaohs. This hall, a technical and artistic feat, offered an ideal monumental setting for ceremonies in honor of Amen, the god king of Thethys. Ramses II also led restoration campaigns on ancient monuments, often erected by his ancestors of the 18th dynasty, or from earlier periods. These restorations sometimes included the addition of his own titles or attices, partially replacing the original hieroglyphs. Although this may surprise the modern observer, this practice was accepted in Egypt as an act of continuation of the past. For Ramses II, it was a way to anchor his reign in tradition while asserting his omnipresence in the architectural landscape. Through these enterprises, Ramses II sought to ensure an imperishable eliky. His ambition went beyond conquest and diplomacy. The construction and conversion of temples, statues, and obelisks across Egypt affirmed his role as responsible for the country's economic and religious prosperity. As his reign progressed, he wanted to leave his mark on the territory. Each inscription, each bas-relief added a detail to an official narrative, where he presented himself as the living instrument of divine will. The image of strength, vitality, and youth of Ramses II had to contend with the biological reality of his advanced age. Forensic analyses carried out on his homie in the 20th and 21st centuries revealed age-related conditions, such as pronounced arthritis in the spine and lower limbs, as well as arterial calcifications. Despite these pathologies, Ramses II continued to hold audiences and appear in public, probably relieved by treatments of the time, such as medicinal plants, warm bandages, and various potions. At a very advanced age, estimated to be around 90 years, or even more, according to some hypotheses, Ramses II maintained tight control over the administration. He summoned officials, gave directives from his palaces at Pi-Ramesses or Thebes, and received foreign emissaries. Although daily decisions were often delegated to bureaucracy, his authority remained firm. In his final years, physically weakened, he surrounded himself with loyal close ones, including some of his sons. However, he continued to have his presence engraved during important rites. The image of the invulnerable pharaoh had to remain intact in the eyes of the people. The death of Ramses II, occurring around the 66th year of his reign, around 1213, before Christ, marked the end of an influential era in Egypt's geopolitics, religion, and architecture. Although weakened, his aura remained considerable. In accordance with the traditions of the New Kingdom, mummification took place over 70 days, drawing in natron, extraction of internal organs, followed by meticulous wrapping of the body. Priests recited magical formulas to guide the king to the afterlife, where he would join the solar bark of Ra and the deified ancestors. According to ancient texts, the remains of Ramses' death were placed in tomb Kible 7 in the Valley of the Kings, but this tomb quickly experienced looting, probably by thieves seeking metals and jewels. To protect the mummy, priest of the 21st dynasty decided to secretly abver the remains to a safer hiding place, known under the code DB3, Tomb 20, near Der el-Bihari, out of sight. Subsequent generations lost track of the DB3-20 hideout. In the 19th century, Egypt attracted the attention of European archaeologists and adventurers, leading to excavations sometimes clandestine. In 1881, the fortuitous discovery of the Fes revolutionized the understanding of pharaonic heritage. Members of the Abdel Rasul family stumbled upon this depot of royal mummies, arousing the greed of traffickers. The Egyptian archaeological authorities, assisted by Gaston Maspero, protected these remains and catalogued the sarcophagi and votive objects. Several renowned pharaohs were identified there, including Seti Thartha, Ramses II, thanks to the hieroglyphic inscriptions on the cartonages and funerary linens. The rediscovery in 1881 was a momentous event. For the first time, a scholarly world in the general public could gaze upon the face, albeit mummified, of one of the most famous pharaohs of antiquity. The remains examined by doctors and Egyptologists revealed fascinating details about his morphology, facial features, red hair, or his color might be debatable, cranial mummification, and the marks of his bone diseases. The impact was such that the mummy sometimes exhibited controversially toured European capitals. In a colonial context, Egypt sought to reaffirm its rights over its heritage, leading to diplomatic dialogues on the matter. After his funeral, the political legacy of Ramses II quickly became apparent. His son Merneptah had to take the reins of an empire weakened by the monarch's demise. Although Ramses II had left behind a solid administrative apparatus, the concentration of power in certain loyal hands had led to internal rivalries and regional difficulties. Mernoptah was faced with external threats and the obligation to consolidate this state. Even though Ramesside control persisted under his descendants, Egypt gradually entered a phase of less stability marked by internal conflicts and a decrease in its influence in Asia. Despite the challenges, Ramses II remained a model for subsequent kings, often cited for his longevity, majestic constructions, and diplomatic and military successes. Following pharaohs sought to emulate his reign, claiming for themselves years of prosperity, solid alliances, and grand achievements. The memorial impact of Ramses II endured into late antiquity Egypt, where his name remained associated with iconic monuments, Abu Simbel and the Ramesseum. Although the Ramesside dynasty had waned, the memory of the great pharaoh persisted in the collective imagination, particularly in the West. Ramses II is often associated with the figure of the pharaoh of the biblical Exodus due to the approximate chronology and the historical stature of the monarch. However, from an archaeological and textual standpoint, this identification remains debated. The Bible does not explicitly name the pharaoh in question, and no contemporary Egyptian document narrates the departure of the Hebrews as described in the sacred texts. Specialists continue to discuss whether the events of the Exodus correspond to migrations or social upheavals of the Ramesside period, or if they are rather a theological, literary narrative compiled later. Despite these uncertainties, the aura of Ramses II only grew. Cinema, literature, and popular imagination have extensively exploited the idea that this sovereign was the pharaoh of the Exodus. This reinforces his legend beyond what monumental inscriptions had already established. The historical theological debate lies in the difficulty of reconciling Egyptian sources generally laudatory with biblical narratives which depict Ramses II as a tyrant whose defeat illustrated divine power. However, for an international audience in search of facts, caution is necessary. Even if Ramses II was a legendary ruler, it is not certain that he precisely corresponds to the biblical figure. Even today, the memory of Ramses II persists in museums, where his mummy and colossal statues continue to fascinate. Visitors to the temples of Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel measure the magnitude of efforts to glorify his reign. The hieroglyphs, epic reliefs, and references to his quasi-divine strength contribute to making Ramses II one of the most famous pharaohs in history. This duality is often highlighted. On one hand, the aging monarch, suffering from arthritis and eternally represented as young. On the other hand, the immortal icon, whose intact or nearly so remains, can still be a Babrid several millennia after his reign. The Ramesside posterity, though less flamboyant, sought to preserve this memory. Pharaohs regularly invoked the blessing of the divine ancestor, praying for the spiritual strength of his cow and preserving or expanding his structures. In the Egyptian tradition, being the son of Ramses was a major arrogant of authority. Even when the political disintegration of the new kingdom was felt, the myth of Ramesside power endured. Some kings, legitimized by a blood or ideological link, sought to present themselves as the successors of the great builder. Over the centuries, the name of Ramses II traversed the Hellenistic and Roman eras before capturing the attention of medieval Arab Aval, and then
European Orientalists. Manetho, a priest from the 3rd century before Christ, alluded to this great king, although his writings are fragmentary.
It wasn't until the 19th century, thanks to the deciphering of hieroglyphs by Jean-François Jean-Paul Jung, that the identity of Ramses II was confirmed and his name precisely placed in the pharaonic chronology. This rediscovery reinforced the image of an unmatched monarch who said jubilees testified to exceptional vitality. Ultimately, the legend of Ramses II transcends the tomb, his body exhumed, studied, and preserved. His memory dissected by historians and archaeologists, and his monuments still standing, contribute to a universal fascination. Ramses the Count embodies the eternal pharaoh, whom neither death nor oblivion could conquer. The contrast between his decrepitude exacerbated by arthritis and the propagated image of an athletic king, immortalized during said jubilees, invites reflection on the nature of power and the ideological function of sovereignty. Official accounts depicted him defying time, while archaeological reality shows an aging man struggling to maintain his authority, supported by a vast state, system, and fervent religiosity. In his later years, the court of Ramses II was divided between the desire to maintain his cult and the necessity to prepare for succession. Some of his sons, already designated as crown princes before their deaths, could not replace him. It was ultimately turned up to his 13th surviving son, who inherited the throne at an already advanced age. This back and forth of heirs customized to Ramses II's exceptional longevity. The difficulties related to the transfer of power after more than 6 decades of reign. However, it would be incomplete to conclude without mentioning the continuity the following generations claimed to descend from Ramses II, attributing a mythical stature to him by citing his exploits and piety. From the 66th year of his reign, Egypt entered a new era, less stable and less flamboyant, but the shadow of Edges the Great remained present. Numerous official documents, architectural dedications and steles reminded that Ramses II had disappeared, leaving a considerable void in power. These sources expressed veneration and nostalgia, marking a before and after Ramses II. His memory was transmitted through the funerary cult and oral tradition, maintained by fabulous tales of his exploits. Although other respectable rulers followed, none matched the fame of the pharaoh, who celebrated his said jubilees at an unprecedented age for his time. Ultimately, the 10th section of Ramses II's life, covering his said jubilees in the twilight of one of the longest reigns in Egyptian history, concludes with a lesson of grandeur and permanence. From sumptuous celebrations to the realities of an old man suffering from chronic ailments, his existence remains a unique example of royal image construction. The Jubilee rites, symbolizing the sovereign's vitality, affirmed that after more than 60 years of reign, Ramses II remained the legitimate regent of an empire he had shaped. The culmination of his journey from the completed hypostyle hall of Karnak to the mummy hidden to escape desecration illustrates a spectrum of historical elements far beyond his disappearance. The second life of Ramses II, in the ancient Egyptian consciousness, began as soon as he drew his last breath. Priests watched over his body, wrapping it in sacred bandages and performing rituals to ensure his life in the afterlife. Then came the era of posterity, where his mummy, uncovered from its shroud, was resurrected in the eyes of the modern world. Through each festival, each megalithic construction, each peace treaty, Ramses too created a myth that outlived him. Thus the twilight of his reign marked not an end, but the thinning of a legendary cycle that continues to reconfigure and expand today, attesting to the narrative strength that a head of state can embody by believing in his own eternity.